Today we're diving into one of the most intriguing UFO encounters, the Falcon Lake incident of 1967. Stefan Mihalich, a Polish immigrant and amateur geologist, had a close encounter with a UFO that left him with unexplainable burns and physical evidence. What makes this case so compelling is the credibility of the witness. The physical evidence, including radiation at the site, and the extensive investigations by Canadian authorities and medical professionals. From the detailed sketch Mihalich drew to the recurring burns that baffled doctors, this case has layers of intrigue that even skeptics find hard to dismiss. So join me as we explore this remarkable incident that continues to challenge our understanding of UFO phenomena. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for being here. Chris Lehto, welcome to LehtoFiles.
He looks up, there are two shapes in the sky, and his first thought as he sees them is, typical dad, what the hell is that? They're saucer shaped, sort of like taking two milk bowls and putting one on top of the other. They are glowing, and they are almost dead silent.
Stefan is startled when one of the saucer-shaped crafts breaks off and heads towards him.
He's at one end of this rocky outcrop, and this craft landed on the flattest part of the giant granite rocky outcrop that he was working on. And within a few seconds, the one that was hovering above departs,
Leaving Stefan alone, only a few meters away from what appears to be a flying saucer.
Looking at the craft that landed, we've got a circular shape that's about 30 to 40 feet in diameter. The top has a dome, a smaller bowl, if you will, over top of the bigger bowl, and there are slits all around it. And this thing is making him squint because he can't look at it directly. It's extremely bright.
Okay, so the object is silent, right? That seems to be the case in most of these encounters. It's also super bright, so it's using some sort of light technology, right? All of these seem to be using some sort of light technology. The other interesting part I thought was it sounded like the Jacob's craft, actually, where it's kind of like saucer or two saucers flattened on top of each other, but then on top there's a raised dome. And in the Jacob's case, the raised dome was kind of spinning, almost not directly attached to the lower saucers, and that's where the beam of energy actually came to shoot at the warhead. So basically, like right in here, where the beam came out and shot.
My heart goes out to people who come upon a landed UFO, because this has got to be an unnerving experience. This is not a distant light in the sky. This is something that's right there in front of you. It can be so scary, people will pass out.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Could you imagine actually seeing a real UFO? We've heard about it from so many people, thousands of people, countless people. But at some level, it seems like it's so hard to believe unless you just see it for yourself.
But not Stefan. He faced many fearful situations years before in Poland. He was a covert operative during World War II.
This speaks to his character. Because of his life experiences, he recognized that don't get afraid until there's a reason to be. It hasn't harmed me.
Remembering his training, the war veteran focuses on chronicling details of the strange craft in front of him.
He sits back and he pulls out a sketch pad and begins drawing it out. And it sits there for about 30 minutes or so.
He noted that it had a dome and it had some bright lights around the top. He noted that a door had opened in one side and that there was an exhaust vent off to the side of the door. He described a classic Hollywood-style flying saucer.
It's then Stefan notices something startling.
A portal on the craft has opened. It was a series of sliding panels, like a camera shutter, to reveal the door.
Stefan's fear is outweighed by his intense curiosity. He musters up the courage to take a closer look.
Okay, so how many of you guys would actually muster the courage, as they say, to go and look at this craft up close? And knowing what I know now, I don't think I would approach the craft. I I'm not like Jim Peniston to go and touch this thing, only because you hear about all these biological effects, right? It's super bright to look at. There must be a ton of energy emanating from this thing. And they said in the actual Westall case that one of the witnesses, a woman, could feel heat kind of coming off. I've heard that in other cases as well, to feel some sort of heat. And as we'll see, this most likely leads to some biological effects, radiation burns, etc. So I don't know if you're mustering the courage to walk up to one of these things, radiation considerations should definitely be the front of your mind.
When he walked towards this craft, he was able to describe it in more detail. And he sees there are no seams, there are no rivets, there are no screws, there's nothing.
This is beyond the ordinary.
Stefan approaches the door and cautiously peers inside the craft.
Okay, if I could peer inside the craft, maybe it's worth it just to go look, even if there's radiation shooting off this thing. I don't know. Peering inside a craft.
He recognized that there were walls about 18 or so inches, so that's a pretty thick wall. And he noticed that there was a lot of light, and he reaches out with his gloved hand to touch the craft. But when he touches it, the skin of the craft is so hot that the rubber tips of all of the fingers of his glove are melted immediately.
That, I would say, is probably a regular feature of anyone who gets within a couple of feet of a UFO. They are often very hot. They will burn you.
Stefan is about to discover this firsthand.
The blast came out of this object, knocking him to the ground, setting his clothes on fire.
Injuring him severely.
He's afraid that he's going to die.
Of course you're in terror and going to imagine all sorts of things, because something's just happened to you never thought could happen. This can be the most traumatic experience of their life.
He was burned to the upper part of his chest.
There have been cases of burns as a result of being close to these things.
To make matters worse, after the UFO blasts off, Stefan Mahalik is now physically ill.
His head spinning, he's dizzy, he's vomiting.
And more worrying, kilometers of rugged forest lie between him and the nearest town.
So where Dad was during the incident was several miles north of the Trans-Canada Highway. There's nothing there. There's nothing there to show you anything, to give you any way indicators. What you're facing is a landscape that's dotted with very high rocky outcrops, very low swampy marshland, and trees in between.
Stefan has little choice but to attempt the long hike through the rough terrain.
So picks up whatever little stuff he's got there, but leaves a lot of it behind, and begins to stumble to the highway.
Miraculously, Stefan manages to make the long journey.
He was eventually treated and examined at a hospital. The burns on his body were very, very evident.
The most dramatic part of the case is the photographs of the burns themselves.
Okay, so this will be interesting. Can the medical professionals identify where these burns would have come from? Let's check it out.
The marks on his abdomen were very, very unusual. They were as if you had taken a checkerboard and put a red checker on each of the squares and then took away the board itself.
Which is extremely puzzling to his doctors.
They didn't really know what to think about this because it was so outside their normal experience.
I can only imagine how Stefan's son Stan must have felt when he saw the state his father was in.
He would get his chance when his father eventually comes home.
My dad had never looked like this to me. He had never been out of control or hurt or sick in my memory. So to see him like that was frightening.
He never saw his dad sick? I mean, it seems crazy to me. I have 3 kids and, man, they're like little petri dishes. Maybe just not sick to that sort of level.
The burns were pretty bad.
That is interesting. It looks like an LED kind of plate, right? Or some sort of like light polarizer. Why would you have a organized structure like that?
Stefan finally confesses what caused it. He was burned by a flying saucer.
Stefan Mahalik said that if you don't believe me, don't believe me. I believed him. My father would not lie to me.
Stefan's story of his encounter with a malevolent UFO reaches national attention.
It was an incessant parade of media. I was followed to school by reporters. They camped out on our lawn waiting for my mom to pull the curtains in the living room. They waited for someone to go to the car. They were waiting like paparazzi.
The RCMP, Canada's federal law enforcement agency, interviews Stefan about his wild claims. They quickly realize he is not making the story up and ask him to take them to where the alleged incident took place.
Okay, so that's great news, right? Good to hear that they're actually investigating. Could you imagine this happening to you and now you have to go and say that to people? They're going to look at you like you're insane. But he has the physical evidence, right, of the burns that they can't identify. So good news, at least, that the Canadian federal law enforcement agency is going to check it out. Let's see what they find at the landing site.
What was found at Falcon Lake was very, very significant.
Stefan shows them his melted gloves, burnt shirt, and they discover something even stranger in the surrounding environment.
That entire ring of trees that surround the spot where the craft came down and landed, all the leaves were withered and brown.
And more compelling, what their Geiger counter reveals.
They check for radiation and realize, oh my goodness, this spot is radioactive. And it seemed to be stronger at the very center of where the craft sat.
Okay, that reminds me of Rendlesham Forest, right? Not until 1980, so 13 years after this. But to go back where this man says out in the middle of the wilderness and find all this actual radiation, and then to see where the trees are withered and brown so you could actually see what the landing site is. Just seems like amazing evidence, right? This is physical evidence. What are they going to determine at the end, right? How could you land and see that? Did the guy make it up? Did he somehow create a radiation event out in the middle of the woods and know where to take the actual federal agents? Pretty miraculous.
And the RCMP acknowledged that, yes, this is a legitimate scene where something occurred that resulted in the injury to this man. There's no way that my dad could have hoaxed this.
50-year-old Polish immigrant and amateur geologist Stephen Mahalik looked forward to his weekend getaways alone in the Falcon Lake area, 90 miles east of his home in Winnipeg, Manitoba. This was Mahalik's favorite prospecting site. Around noon on May 20th, 1967, as he examined a quartz formation, Mahalik was distracted by some unruly geese. He looked up and was transfixed. He says he saw two cigar-shaped objects glowing red in the sky.
Okay, interesting here, right? So when it lands, he gets a detailed look at it and says it's basically a flying saucer, right, with the dome on top. But from this account, thanks to Eyes on Cinema, great channel, up in the air, saucers can look like cigar-shaped objects, right? So that's when people say it's a cigar-shaped object, could easily be a saucer, just at a different angle.
The following is a recording Mahalik later made of what he saw next.
The size, was amazing. And here they coming down. With speed, I just can't describe. Amazing speed.
Mahalik says one of them stopped, suddenly accelerated, then disappeared. The other landed about 50 yards away. He watched in awe.
I hear. And I hear a high-pitched whistle while running pumps on high speed.
Okay, so normally there's no sound, right? But this is interesting. It's like he gets close enough to hear the internal workings of it. So there is some sort of sound. He hears like a high-pitched whistle. So like a pump on high speed.
And the thing around it was of gray-pink color. It's stainless steel and it was pink hot. And I can feel the breeze on my face that thing gets hot outside. There was my notebook, there was my pencil, where I sketched this.
So he says there, similar to other witnesses, that they could feel the heat coming off of this craft, which is pretty amazing why you would walk up to it and touch it if you can feel the heat from pretty far away. So let's see what he says.
Mahalik claims it was round, about 40 feet long and about 10 feet high. His curiosity took hold, and he approached the craft. He examined the outside of it, slowly touching the glowing skin with his gloved hand. It was fiery hot, nearly melting the palm of his rubber glove. Mahalik says the craft rotated, turning its grid-like exhaust vent toward him. The blast of hot gas from the vent knocked him to the ground, setting his shirt and undershirt on fire. The craft suddenly lifted off the ground, according to Mahalik, and soared straight up. He threw his burning shirts to the ground, dazed and in severe pain from burns to his chest and stomach. Mahalik says he wandered around for what seemed like hours before he managed to gather up his supplies.
I mean, that's not very nice of them, right? I mean, this object sounds like it turned its exhaust vent towards him and then blasted away. Or were they trying to be nice and the exhaust is where the blast doesn't come from or minimizes it? I don't know.
He found his way out of the woods, caught a bus, and later that night arrived back in Winnipeg. Still in pain, he rushed from the bus station to nearby Misericordia Hospital, where he was treated for first-degree burns. Mahalik claimed the blast from the craft had etched a grid-like pattern into his abdomen that matched the pattern on the exhaust vent. The next day, Sunday, he was spirited off to the St. Regis Hotel after convincing the managing editor of Winnipeg's highly regarded daily newspaper, the Winnipeg Tribune, that his extraordinary encounter was real.
Okay, so there he added another detail that basically it was like the exhaust vent. So that was the shape of the burns, was the exhaust vent. But didn't look like it was his shirt, right? Didn't look like it burned holes through everything. So it does seem like radiation, right? Heat radiation?
At that time, I said, okay, as any newsman would have done, draw it. I gave him a piece of paper.
So as we look at the drawing here, so this must be the door that he walked up in. He said it was 18 inches thick, so 1.5 feet thick. But what was inside? He didn't say what was inside. This must be the vent that burned him. But some slits on the top.
I think that drawing has become the most famous UFO piece of evidence in the world today. He sat down, he drew it in front of me. I hid it. I talked to him. I called doctors. I called police. And I sure as hell didn't want the Winnipeg Free Press getting the story.
Monday's edition of the Tribune led with this headline: Mahalik soon became a sensation worldwide. What followed was one of the most intensely examined UFO cases on record. Over the next 2 years, Mahalik's burns kept recurring, and no one could explain why. He was examined by more than a dozen physicians in Canada and the United States, including doctors at the Mayo Clinic. An investigation by the Royal Canadian Air Force concluded that the abdominal burns sustained by Mr. Mahalik remain as unexplainable as to the source of the burn.
Okay, wow, that's interesting. So the investigation by the Royal Canadian Air Force concluded that the burns are unexplainable as to the source of the burns. Why they would come back later on is that, that's crazy, right? How could you have recurring burns? Interesting.
The Mayo Clinic psychological report concluded that Mahalik was not prone to delusions, hallucinations, or any type of emotional disorder. University of Manitoba astronomer Chris Rutkowski, believing the government reports left many questions unanswered, launched his own investigation. In 1994, he published The Falcon Lake Case, Too Close an Encounter, in the respected Journal of UFO Studies.
The terrain around the site is very rugged, very rocky. The brush is very, very dense. The trees all look alike. The rocks all look alike.
And to a person who's disoriented, not feeling very well, it might be very, very difficult to find the exact site after some period of time has elapsed.
Skeptics, disagreeing with Rutkowski, also do not believe that Mahalik would make physical contact with an extremely hot object he assumed was a UFO. But this does not surprise his son.
He is the kind of fellow that fear is not in his vocabulary. Not that he's a fearless man, but that when he sees something he doesn't understand, he doesn't fear it. He just chooses to understand it. For my dad to fabricate something as large as this would require more than I think he had, more than he has. He's a simple man. He grew up and lived a very straight, hard life.
This was no con man. This was a man who later went down a mail. They couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure it out. The doctor I had there couldn't figure it out. I am not about to be taken by anybody. This guy didn't take me. This guy was legit.
This guy was legit, he says. If you guys enjoyed that case, so interesting, I didn't know about it. And from 1967, it apparently went around the world. Also interesting, it didn't like burn his face, right? He just had the burns on his chest, like it was aimed right at his chest. But gets a drawing of it. It seems a very credible witness, right? Why would this guy lie about this? His family all vouches for him. And then most interesting is they go and investigate the site and find the radiation readings at the site. And then he continues to have unexplainable burns on his chest. So just an amazing case. Physical evidence, biological effects. You know, we knew about these biological effects all the way back in 1967. So hopefully we will start to get some actual information from our federal agencies. That would be unbelievable. Thank you for watching. Please hit the like button. It really helps and it's free. Consider subscribing to get future notifications of when I release videos. And you might like this video recommended by YouTube just for you. If you want to support the channel, join these great people over here, get exclusive bonus content, then click this button here, patreon.com/chrislehto, or become a YouTube member. If you want to continue the discussion, go to UAP Society Discord. Links are all in the description. Have a great rest of your day. Peace.